It is the Awesemo MLB Live Before Lock, sponsored by Jock Market. I don't know if I hit my cue or not because Jordan is sitting in the dark and I could not see his fingers at all when he was counting down. But I was doing a 5 count in my head, and I think I was about online there. But baseball slate today, obviously a football slate coming up after this. We've got the NFL Deeper Dive, NFL Live Before Lock. So guys, like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel because we got baseball covered, we got football covered tonight. But first, we do have only about a week and a half left of baseball slates, but contest sizing are still pretty solid. And, 7 games today. It's not like there's non-existent prize pools, even though there's showdown for football tonight. So, Adam, what do you make of tonight's 7-game slate?
I actually think it's a pretty interesting one. Like writing the deep dive today, there was plenty of pitching to talk about, especially for, only a 7-game slate. But then also there's enough bad pitchers against good offenses that you're not really forced onto one particular offense either. I don't think there's several offenses in good spots. Then you also have a few spots that you have good enough offenses facing popular pitchers that I think will be interesting to talk about. So for a 7-gamer, I think it's actually pretty wide open, and there's a lot of interesting decisions you can make.
Yeah, and I mean, right away we'll start at the top of the pitching options here with Robbie Ray, who is going to look different on Fanduel and DraftKings. Where DraftKings right now, he looks about efficiently owned, very efficiently owned, actually. 33.4% projected ownership, 33.5% chance to be a top 2 pitcher. Over on Fanduel, where he's in a price tier of his own at 11,000, it seems like the field is not looking to pay up a pitcher today. So Robbie Ray projected for 6.5% ownership compared to a 12% chance to be a top pitcher. So I do think it's a pretty good pay up spot to be contrarian. But overall, how highly are you prioritizing Robbie Ray, who's had an outstanding season overall, but he has seen a lot of good luck. I actually think if the season was 10 right now, he would have the highest left on base rate in the history of baseball. This spot for him against the Tampa Bay Rays, do you think we could finally see some of that regression hit?
I mean, you certainly could. Tampa Bay has a very, very good offense. They have a lot of good right-handed power in this lineup. We know that Ray has had some issues with home runs this year, but I attribute at least some of that to pitching his home games in Dunedin and Buffalo for a large part of the season. Now you're going into Tropicana Field, which helps to mitigate some power. But still, if you're talking about a pitcher that strikes everyone out and is really, really good, but does have home run issues, going up against this Tampa Bay lineup certainly isn't the easiest spot. There is some downside, but still a 3.8 implied run total. I think this is a perfect situation, and I'm certainly guilty of not doing it. But if you're playing multiple sites, this is a really, really good spot too, because it's going to allow you to naturally hedge, I think, because like you were saying, he looks really, really good on DraftKings. He is popular at 33%, but he's not that expensive. He's relatively easy to get to. Whereas on FanDuel, he's really, really expensive and low owned. So in theory, if you're playing multiple sites, it's a perfect spot to, be looking to the Tampa Bay bats on DraftKings and be loading up on Robbie Ray on FanDuel.
Yeah, and for this particular slate, I'm still even on DraftKings at the 33%. In my current build, I'm overweight to the field on them. There just aren't that many pitchers I really like, particularly in the high end of the pricing range. And we're going to talk about Ranger Suarez later, who I think is an excellent value play when we hit some of the value pitchers. But he's projected for 43% ownership, and I feel the same way about Ranger Suarez as it is last time out against the Cubs. He has a great matchup today against the Baltimore Orioles, but I just don't know that I want to get him in more than half my lineups to be overweight to the field on him. And then you just kind of look at the slate and try to figure out, all right, where am I going to be overweight to if I'm going to be underweight to a pitcher who's 50% owned? And I just kind of gravitate towards Robbie Ray, who we have being the best odds of being a top 2 scoring pitcher on the slate by a fairly wide margin. He's projected with a 33.5% chance to be a top 2 scoring pitcher. The next closest is Nestor Cortez at 25.6%. So that ownership on Robbie Ray on DraftKings for tournaments, do you think it's a number you're more apt to get over or underweight to the field to?
I'd expect to be around it, if not a little bit over the way things look right now, for basically the same reasons you were saying. It's a lot of raw ownership in a kind of dicey spot, but at the same time, there's not really there's not much in the way of similar upside at low ownership, or just, low ownership in general. Like Nestor Cortez is pulling 30%. Peralta's pulling 36%. Manaya is pulling 30%. If you're looking to low own pitchers that are actually good, you're basically going to have Huascar Ynoa and Framber Valdez, it looks like. Valdez nowhere near Robbie Ray in terms of strikeout upside. Certainly a good pitcher, but nowhere near the strikeout stuff that Ray has. Ynoa has good strikeout stuff and a good matchup, but still, not in the same category as Ray. So the way it looks right now, even though it is a lot of ownership, I would expect to be getting quite a bit of Ray. It is a spot, though, where, across 150 lineups or even in 3 max, I think Tampa Bay is viable. I certainly expect to have both sides here just because it is a very volatile spot.
Yeah, and then I mean the other thing too is you just look at some of these pitchers, and it's hard to find other pitchers to feel all that good about. And Robbie Ray does have substantial strikeout upside. The only guy who's comparable to him in terms of strikeout rate is Freddie Peralta. He's projected for a lot of ownership, 36% on DraftKings. Over on Fanduel, we've got him projected for, where is he at? Oh, there he is, 25.5%. So he's the most popular pitcher on Fanduel, one of the most popular pitchers on DraftKings. What kind of concerns do you have about the length we're going to be getting out of Freddie Peralta? Because it wasn't that long ago, only like a week ago, nobody wanted to play Freddie Peralta. He was a massive contrarian option because of some pitch count concerns. We see that number come up, and now all of a sudden everybody seems super confident the pitch count's going to be there. I'm still not sure. The Brewers have clinched their playoff spot. They're going to clinch the division. They're basically locked into 3 seed in the National League. So Freddie Peralta, how much risk do you think there is that we only see 5 or so innings out of him again today?
I'm cautiously optimistic. So he went 6 innings last game. He only threw 71 pitches, but they let him go 6 innings. The start before that, he went 81 pitches, was only able to get through 3 2/3. The way I see it, and I think it makes sense logically, is that they, at the very least, we can expect that they're going to let him throw 80 to 85 pitches and or go 6 innings. They're probably not, at least based on last game, probably not going to say, oh, go throw a complete game today. Since, considering that he was being efficient and they still pulled him after 6 innings. And then you also have to keep in mind too, that this is a National League game, and that sort of hurts that as well, because it's pretty easy for them to say like, okay, you're through 6 innings and your spot in the order's coming up, you're done. But since he threw 81 pitches the game before, let's say he's being a little bit less efficient and he's at, 70 pitches through 5. I think it's reasonable to think they would still bring him back out for the 6th potentially. So I do think there's some risk, but the salary is also cheap for the guy that actually has the highest strikeout percentage on the slate. You're getting a bit of a salary discount. He's the 3rd most expensive option on DraftKings. He's the 5th most expensive option on FanDuel. So it goes back to, we talk about it a lot, that you can say whatever you want about guys' stats and all of that. Everybody has a price where they make sense. And I think that Peralta's salary is factoring in that we don't know exactly how deep into the game he's going to go. So I don't feel strongly that this is where he just throws 100 pitches and goes 7 innings, but I'm not expecting him to be significantly limited here. I would expect that you're getting 6 innings or 80 to 85 pitches at least.
Yeah, the one thing that's given me a little bit of pause with Peralta still is just it's the ownership. He's super popular on FanDuel, like I said, the single most popular pitcher on the slate. And then on DraftKings, 36% projected ownership. For as good as he's been this year, it's a Cardinals lineup that doesn't strike out a whole bunch. And for sure, Freddie Peralta is going to be in my player pool. But right now, I have him in 15% of my lineups. And that's not final, except it's a pretty good indication that when I do update my lineups, once we get all the lineups in for the teams, I'm probably going to be underweight to field on Freddie Peralta. So do you think all the ownership that he's getting is warranted today?
I think he's coming in around where he should be given the salary discount. I do think getting away from him on FanDuel makes a lot of sense since it's a 1-pitcher site. There's more opportunity cost to the position. But since we do have those kind of questions about exactly how deep into the game is he going to go, and you do get, the win and quality start bonus on FanDuel that matter, going to some of these other low-owned guys, I think makes sense because not only can they just score more points than Peralta in a normal start, but it's a bigger deal if, say, they do pull him at 73 pitches after 5 innings because he can't get the quality start. So I think that the ownership he's getting on FanDuel is a little bit more concerning to me than it is on DraftKings, where you need the 2 pitchers and where most of the viable options are getting similar ownership.
Yeah, and that's something else looking at the ownership is trying to find out, where I really want to pivot. And the first thing that really stands out to me is just the ownership on USCAR. If there's one guy in the high end that I want to pivot off of, if I'm trying to get off of Freddie Peralta, it's who makes the most sense. It's only projected for 7.5% ownership on DK. On FanDuel, we have, a project for just 5.8% ownership. So on this slate where there aren't that many pitchers I really like, I think from a contrarian perspective, is probably my favorite contrarian option. Do you agree with that? Or is there another contrarian guy you really like getting to?
No, I agree. I had actually, when I saw his projected ownership, I pulled up the DraftKings page because I thought maybe he was I didn't realize he was on a pitch count or something, because it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me why he's getting so much less ownership than the alternatives. He's got a good matchup against Arizona. He's got a good strikeout rate for the season at 28.1%. The only pitchers on this slate with a higher strikeout percentage are Peralta, Ray, and technically AJ Alexy, but don't really care about that. He has a 3.27 xFIP. I don't really get why his ownership's as low as it is. Maybe it comes up between now and lock. Maybe it just comes in a little bit higher than we're projecting. That's certainly possible too. But assuming it's at least directionally accurate and that he's not going to pull that he's going to pull less ownership than guys like Manaya and Peralta at that price point, I really like given the upside.
Yeah, and it's an ownership that really doesn't make sense to me. And it was something somebody had actually messaged me on Twitter about. I can't remember who it was. It's somebody who watches regularly, though. It's just slipping my mind, and he'll probably message me right now to remind me. But he didn't understand the low ownership, and then some places have a low projection on it today. And I don't either. I mean, he hasn't worked super deep into games lately, so maybe that's a slight concern. But it's not like he's been crazy restricted with pitch counts. He's just been a little bit inefficient, and it's in part at least because he's been striking out a lot of hitters. Last time out against the Rockies, he only made it through 4 2/3 innings, but he still struck out 8 in those innings. The game before against the Washington Nationals, 7 strikeouts in 5 innings. So do you look at those innings pitched, and is that any pause for concern about his upside?
Not really, because of the pitches. In those last 5 starts, 92, 89, 91, 96, 93. Yeah, he's not the most efficient, but like you were saying, it's in part because he strikes out so many guys. I'll take that trade-off in DFS for sure, especially on DraftKings. But, on Fanduel, it's fine. You're just running kind of the same risk as Freddie Peralta. But, yeah, I'm not too concerned about it because the pitch count's telling me that if that Inoa still has the upside, like, let's say he goes out there and strikes out 8 guys, but he doesn't walk anyone. He gives up 1 or 2 hits. He still has the potential to give you 6 or 7 innings in 90 to 95 pitches and still get strikeouts. So I'm there too. I like
Yeah, and then one other guy who I wouldn't really call contrarian, although I'm surprised that Nestor Cortes isn't picking up more ownership. Really favorable matchup for him at home against the Texas Rangers. And Nestor Cortes, long-term, I'm not sure if I actually believe in him because his stuff is not particularly great. He relies on a lot of deception and kind of Johnny Cueto type stuff where it's throwing off hitters' timing, stop and start. His average fastball velocity below 90 miles per hour this year. But he's striking dudes out, and he's doing it, pretty consistently at this point. Last time out, a career best 11 strikeouts, and I thought that could potentially inflate his ownership in a positive matchup against Texas Rangers. But only 27.9% ownership for Nestor Cortes over on DraftKings. On FanDuel, a little more popular at 19.6%, which is kind of surprising for a single pitcher site where he has a similar price tag. But Cortes is another pitcher who I look at on DraftKings that match up against the Rangers, and I'm going to be overweight to him. I'm pretty sure I'm overweight to him by a decent amount in my build right now.
Yeah, I think he's a good option. He's going up against Texas. They do have a low strikeout percentage against left-handed pitching this year. I don't put a ton of stock into that since it's just, naturally a smaller sample than against right-handed pitching. But either way, they've been really, really bad as well in terms of offensive production. So worst case, it's a bad offense that is kind of difficult to strike out. More likely case, it's a bad offense that Cortes also will be able to get strikeouts against. He's made a total of 11 starts now this season. He has a 24.5% strikeout percentage. He has allowed 1.5 home runs per 9, and he has a 4.56 xFIP. But as a starter, he's only allowed a 277 expected WOBA. So I'm not too concerned about the elevated xFIP numbers. Like, it doesn't seem like he's giving up a ton of quality contact and getting super lucky. So I think that, it's a situation where there are still some unknowns here because he has made 11 starts this year. And as the price rises, he naturally becomes riskier. But a matchup against Texas isn't where I'm drawing the line on Cortes. I do think he's a good option. I think that, I feel a little bit better about guys like Peralta and Manaya just because they have a bit longer track record, but it's not a big difference to me. And Cortes is getting a little bit less ownership. So I'm with you as far as liking Cortes. In terms of pitch count too, 98 pitches last time out, 103, 5 starts ago, he threw 104. And we actually saw last start the Yankees really try and extend him. He came out to start the 7th inning, gave up a run. They took him out, but it wasn't like, he sit 6 innings, we're just going to take him out, even though he can go a little bit further.
Yeah, and we've got Jimmy Bloomfield in the chat saying, Adam, your tune on Cortes has changed quite a bit for good reason. Who expected Nestor Cortes to be that good? I was expecting this guy to regress for forever. And then something else, not to put words in Adam's mouth here, but remember for a long time, Nestor Cortes was a super popular pitcher when he was throwing like 50, 60 pitches per start. And it just didn't really make a whole lot of sense then. But I don't remember exactly what your opinion was on Nestor Cortes before, but mine changed too, but I think that's fine to change your opinion based on new information.
Yeah, I mean, my opinion was that it was likely that he struggles as a starter, which I think is typically the case when guys go from a reliever role to a starter role. He started out not really striking guys out, but we've seen the strikeout rate tick up as the sample size has gotten better. That's something that stabilizes relatively quickly. So the fact that he has struck out 24.5% of hitters as a starter does suggest that he's having success. And again, this isn't a tough matchup. I'm a little concerned about the price tag, but because, obviously it makes it riskier, but I think he's shown enough that I certainly can go to him against the Rangers at the very least.
Yeah, and then like you said, the price tag, it's higher than what we've seen from Nestor Cortez and some of his other starts. But I mean, we're looking at some of the other guys we're considering also. And, Framber Valdez is somebody else who rates out as being underowned in our top pitchers tool, which, by the way, top pitchers tool, that is free to use over at Awesemo.com today. But I don't know what to make of Framber Valdez's upside at 9,500. He doesn't generate a whole lot of strikeouts. So I'd rather get to Cortez and Valdez. Valdez is a contrarian option. I just don't know what his realistic upside is at a 9,500 price tag when he's a 22% K rate. So I ask you, what are you planning to do with Valdez today? He's been a guy who I just haven't gotten to all that much lately.
Yeah, it's tough with Valdez because he gets an elevated price tag because he's a good real life pitcher. He has for the season a 3.58 xFIP. He's got far and away the best ground ball percentage on the slate at 69.2%. I think it's like 12 points higher than the next closest guy. But the issue is that he doesn't give you similar strikeout upside as the other pitchers in his price range. So on the one hand, he is low owned, and it's certainly reasonable to think that in any given start, he can score more fantasy points than guys like Ray, Manaya, Peralta, even though they're going to strike out more guys. You're basically just saying hopefully he gets 6-7 innings, doesn't give up a run. Those guys struggle a bit. What makes it difficult for me today, though, is that there's so many of those guys. It would be different if it was just him versus Robbie Ray. Clearly, Robbie Ray would be the number one guy, but it's only one guy that Valdez has to beat. You just need Ray to have a bad start. But when you have Ray, Manaya, Inoa, Cortez, you're kind of saying, okay, well, I need Valdez to go have a good start by his standards, but then you're probably still going to need most of those guys to struggle at least a little bit just because they are such better strikeout pitchers and mostly in good matchups as well. So the way I'm not prioritizing Valdez, I think he still will serve a role as far as like if I have a lineup that's relatively popular in terms of hitters, taking that ownership discount to Valdez will make some sense. But I'm more interested in going out of my way to get to Inoa than Valdez, even though Valdez probably ends up being the better pitcher. In general, like he's probably better than Inoa, just because Inoa gives you more strikeout upside.
Yeah, and then the only other high-priced pitcher that we haven't really talked about here is Sean Manaya, who I'm not exactly sure what to make of Sean Manaya, just from the standpoint of he's home, that's favorable. He's pitching against Seattle, that's well and good enough. His underlying numbers this year have been okay, but not great. 4.17 expected ERA, 3.74 FIP. He does generate a lot of strikeouts at 26.1%, but he's also going to be really popular and one of the more negatively leveraged pitchers on the slate in our top pitchers tool, 31% ownership with a 20.3% chance to be a top two pitcher. So once again, Sean Manaya in my player pool, but I ultimately think I'm going to end up coming underweight to the field on him.
Yeah, I think Manaya is fine. The Mariners do have plenty of strikeouts in their lineup. It's a good park to pitch in. He's getting a little bit more ownership than I expected. When I wrote the deep dive today, I thought that he would be one of the lower owned guys. I thought maybe you would get a little bit more ownership going to Ray, maybe a little bit more going even to I thought you'd get more going to Inoa and then less going to Manaya. But as it is right now, I think he's okay. There's still strikeouts here. It's a good park. One thing that concerns me too, and it's not, the end all be all because Seattle just strikes out so much on their own, but against right-handed hitters this year, Manaya only has a 23.7% strikeout percentage. He's been okay at limiting production, 323 expected WOBA, 168 expected ISO. Those numbers aren't alarming, but the 23.7% strikeout percentage against righties compared to 34% against lefties is a little bit concerning when you look at Seattle's projected lineup and, they have 6 right-handed bats in it. It's maybe not quite as good or it's a little bit riskier, I guess, for Manaya since his numbers against righties in terms of strikeouts just haven't been nearly as good.
Yeah, and there's an obvious pivot here too, which is if I'm trying to prioritize getting to Inoa today, the projections we have on these two pitchers are not different in terms of upside. We've got Inoa at 19.6% chance to be a top 2 scoring pitcher on this slate. Sean Manaya 20.3, so basically identical, but here's where the difference comes into play. 30.7% projected ownership for Manaya compared to 7.5% for Inoa. So just comparing that information between the two pitchers, it's such a higher priority for me.
Yeah, even looking at our projections, we have Inoa like 0.3 of a point higher, or Manaya 0.3 of a point higher than Inoa. So yeah, I think if the ownership projections stay where they are, it's just going to be a lot easier for me to get to Inoa. I wouldn't be surprised at all, though, if we do see it come down a little bit on Manaya and come up a little bit on Inoa.
All right, we do have a super chat here from Nick Engel. He wants us to talk about some Fanduel stacks, and then we'll talk about some of the value pitchers on the slate, Ranger Suarez in particular, because that is one of the more important situations to figure out today because he's clearly in a good spot, but he's projecting for like a bazillion% ownership. But Nick Engel here is asking us, what's up, guys? On Fanduel, one lineup. what team/teams would you be looking to stack over on FanDuel? So pulling up the top stack tools right now for FanDuel. And first off, the teams that I think we kind of write off pretty quickly if you're just playing a single entry. The Atlanta Braves massively overowned. The New York Yankees, Milwaukee Brewers. Those are the teams with the top negative leverage stacks. So at least to me, one that makes sense. And also it's going to depend a little bit what you're doing at pitcher. But I think Robbie Ray makes for the best pitching play over on FanDuel. And you don't have to worry too much about offense ownership once you're rostering Robbie Ray, just because he's so contrarian at pitcher. But the Houston Astros are fairly popular in the high end of our FanDuel top stacks tool. However, the ownership looks warranted there. We have them at 15.2% ownership share, 16.7% chance to be a top stack. So finding a way to stack the Houston Astros with Robbie Ray as the pitcher, I think that's what I would prioritize in a single entry FanDuel lineup. But how about for you, Adam?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say too. I haven't built anything, so I don't know for sure. But typically what ends up happening for me is that I would get to one of the highest probability under-owned teams, and that looks like Houston. I'm with you completely on Ray. Really, really like him in tournaments. Houston gives you, we don't have the lineup yet, but most likely will give you some value at the bottom of the order if you need it. They're not super expensive as a whole. I think Oakland looks pretty good as well. Tyler Anderson's a decent pitcher. The park's not great, but Oakland projected to go a bit under-owned too. So if not Houston, I think Oakland will be the next one I get to.
Yeah, and the other thing with Houston also, they have the overall top projected value percentage on FanDuel for us as well. So like you said, some of those hitters towards middle/bottom of the order, they're cheap enough where you can mix one or two of them in, make the stack work, pay up for Ray without too much issue. So that's the way I would go. Four-man Astros stack, Robbie Ray pitcher. And I think you got a good start to a GPP lineup there. All right, let's head back over to the pitchers now. And let's do the Ranger Suarez discussion now, and I'm going to refresh the ownership to make sure that I have the most recent one in front of me because yes, I do. Still very popular. Ranger Suarez on DraftKings today, 6,500. Very favorable price tag. The price tag is wrong. At home against the Baltimore Orioles, Suarez should not be 6,500. But he's projected for 43.3% ownership, which is a massively high number. Over on FanDuel, completely different story where Suarez is just appropriately priced at 9,000. But what are you going to be doing with Ranger Suarez when, just from a projection standpoint, he is by far the most likely cheap pitcher to land in the optimal lineup on DraftKings? But how do you navigate the 43.3% ownership?
A lot's going to depend on what offenses I end up getting to, because if I get to low-owned offenses, then I certainly want to get to Suarez. I think he is the best cheap pitching option. He's been good as a starter. He started 9 games now, 24.4% strikeout percentage, 3.68 xFIP. Matchup against the Orioles is okay. There's certainly some power in the Orioles lineup, but the bottom of the order is pretty bad. They lose their designated hitter. They don't have Trey Mancini. The park is scary, but it's not warm, which helps Suarez as well. So I think clearly the best value SP2 on DraftKings. And if I've saved ownership, by playing low-owned hitters, then give me Suarez. But if I have played more popular hitters, I think that when you look at the value options, there's too big of a gap in ownership between guys like Suarez, Shane Bazz, even John Lester. I mean, not that I think John Lester is any good, but he's, you're basically getting 43-1 odds on Lester versus Suarez. So using guys like that is going to be useful where you have more popular offenses and need a cheap pitcher, I think.
So for me, I'm probably going to come somewhere around the field on Ranger Suarez, maybe a little bit below, but there aren't that many cheap pitchers. Although we're going to talk about one in a second, you mentioned that I like quite a bit. And I think you'll be able to figure out who it is without too much difficulty. But Shane Bazz.
Yeah.
The matchup is terrifying, except given his acumen as a pitching prospect, I'm okay with it when he's only projected for 1% ownership. But Ranger Suarez, one thing that does work in his favor is even though we have him with a 43.3% ownership share, we have him the 40.7% chance to be one of the top 2 value pitchers on the slate. So as long as you're paying up for an offense that I think is somewhat contrarian, then I still think I don't have too much issue getting to it there, which kind of what you said as well. But, looking at a team like the Atlanta Braves are not a team that I'm actively looking to stack. They're projected for 28% ownership on DraftKings. However, if I was inclined to get to a Braves stack, I'd want to do it Bazz. I think if you're rostering Suarez with the Braves, that's what everybody's doing. So that's something that's really hard to differentiate. But if you're rostering Bazz, that's the kind of situation where I think it would make sense to still be able to stack the Braves. Whereas a lower owned stack, say like the Toronto Blue Jays, who are going to be only project for 3.3% ownership. Obviously, I wouldn't roster Bazz in that one because he's pitching against them. But that's a lineup where I'd look to pivot off of Ranger Suarez. Maybe I'd go, or I'd be more inclined to play Ranger Suarez in the Toronto Blue Jays lineup just because the Blue Jays are so low owned. So I feel like that's kind of where you're at as well.
Yeah, it just comes down to total ownership of the lineup. Suarez projects better than Bazz, but Bazz is getting virtually no ownership. He has a difficult matchup, but he's got really good minor league numbers. He's one of the top pitching prospects in baseball. He was part of that god-awful Chris Archer trade that brought Austin Meadows and Tyler Glasnow to Tampa Bay. This was the third piece. Now he's in the majors as well. 10 starts at AAA this year, struck out 36% of hitters. 7 starts at AA, struck out 40.8% of hitters. We know that this is a Blue Jays lineup that not only has a lot of power, but also doesn't really strike out. But 6,900 in Tropicana, the ceiling is still there. It's just that he's not going to hit it all that frequently because of the matchup. But certainly the upside, a cheap price point, and getting virtually no ownership compared to Suarez. So I do think he's the natural pivot away.
Yeah, and if you just look at our projections right now, he's only projected for 1% ownership, which that's really the entire thing here. We have a pitcher here who has a 10.2% chance of going to the top 2 scoring pitchers on the slate. Pretty good value percentage too, 18.8% chance of going to the top 2 value pitchers on DK. The only pitcher with a better mark right now, better pitchers are Ranger Suarez and Nestor Cortez. So given the 1% ownership on Bazz, I'll roll the dice and get him into some lineups. Like you said, the matchup is as far from ideal as possible, but at least he's home. He is able to hit 100 miles per hour. The stuff is really good, highly ranked prospect. So I'll be looking to roll the dice there a little bit. You mentioned John Lester. How much John Lester do you think you're actually going to be getting into your lineups? Because I prefer not rostering John Lester.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully something like 5-6%. Like he's certainly not someone I want to get to. But if so Suarez is clearly the guy that you're going to get to first in that price range. Bazz is second. It's only a 7-game slate. There's a lot of ownership going to most of the pitchers that I want to get to. I wouldn't be surprised if I end up with, more than 1% Lester, but certainly more Bazz than Lester for me.
Yeah, that's where I'm at as well. And the only other pitcher here that I think is kind of relevant is maybe John Means to talk about, where 7,700 on DK. He's also projected for very low ownership, 3.9%. Somebody who first half of the year, John Means was pitching really well, and second half of the year, less so. If we want to look at one positive here, at least he's going to be in the National League where he gets the benefit of facing a pitcher. I'm personally not really getting to John Means at the 7,700 price tag, but do you view him as a contrarian option that you'd like to work into your lineups?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's okay. He's kind of just, I think, a run-of-the-mill pitcher. It's not a particularly good matchup. It's not a great park. The thing is, he's not that cheap either. So I think I typically will end up going to guys like Bazz or Lester just for that salary savings, to get, another bat in my lineup. I think you can make this a similar case for AJ Alexi even. Like, he's not any worse than John Lester. He gives you strikeout upside, even though it's a tough matchup. I just think that most likely I'll end up kind of going to low owned guys in that price range more than I get to Means, just because of the little bit of a salary difference. But same kind of thing with Means. He's just not pulling any ownership. He's got a 9% chance of being a top 2 pitcher on DraftKings, only projected for about 4% ownership. So you're not looking at this saying, oh, he's going to do well against the Phillies because, XYZ reasons. He's probably not, but he's low enough owned that if you need to save ownership in your lineup, he's going to do well against them often enough to be worth rostering at his low ownership.
All right. Anything else you want to talk about at pitchers? If not, we could head over to the stacks.
No, I think that's about it. I kind of feel like every pitcher is, you can make a case for just about every pitcher on this slate in tournaments, whether it's they're in a good matchup or they're not getting any ownership. I think the exceptions would be like Mejia, Barria, and Anderson against Oakland's a tough matchup, but like even those guys are 1% owned. But I think it's just like I was saying at the top, there's so many different ways you can go on this slate.
By the way, this is actually a good question from Stephen Leibowitz in the YouTube chat. He wants to know how stretched out Bazz is. Based on his recent minor league starts, about as stretched out as he could be. His last 3 starts in the minor leagues, last time out, 6 innings, 10 strikeouts. Time for that 5 innings, 7 strikeouts. Time for that 5 innings, 5 strikeouts. So I don't think it's out of the question that we get 5-ish innings out of him. Obviously, if he struggles with efficiency, could be a little less. If he does well, a little more. But considering he pitched 6 innings and struck out 10 hitters last time, that's not a real concern for me. Is it for you?
No, I'm expecting if he pitches well to get, 5-6 innings out of him.
Yeah, that's where I'm at. So we'll head over to offenses. But first, guys, do us a favor, like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. We've got all the NFL content coming up next for the Monday Night Football game, the NFL Deeper Dive, and also NFL Live Before Lock. So 2 full hours of content for one single football game. Also, today's show is sponsored by Jock Market. If you guys are not familiar with Jock Market, head over to your app store, download the app. When you're making your first deposit, use the promo code Awesemo to get up to a $50 bonus on your first deposit. Jock Market is a different way to play daily fantasy sports. It's contests where you don't have to worry about ownership, don't have to worry about lineup construction. It's a stock market, but for athletes. So there's an IPO period. You bid on the players, then you get stocks of players, and depending how well they perform, you get a payout based on what you bought their stock for. So, all right, let's head on over to the offenses, and let's start with the Atlanta Braves, because we already had somebody in the YouTube chat ask, do people not like the Braves today? That was CB. So do people really hate the Braves? No. In fact, nobody hates the Braves. This is the most popular team by quite a wide margin on DraftKings, 27.9% projected ownership over on DK. That is the highest mark on the slate by quite a bit. Same thing goes for Fanduel, projected for 23.9% ownership. So the results here, they are the most negatively leveraged offense on Fanduel. On DraftKings, they are the second most negatively leveraged offense behind the New York Yankees. But how are you going to be handling the super chalky Braves today?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great spot. It's easily one of my favorite spots on the slate. Mejia hasn't, there's no real reason to think that he's a particularly good pitcher. He's only struck out 13.6% of righties this year, 28% of lefties in a very limited sample. But you have Atlanta with a 5.3 implied run total. They're pretty cheap. The issue is just that you're getting a ton of ownership, and there's not a really easy way to get away from it either. On DraftKings right now, we have Dansby Swanson projected as the lowest owned Braves bat at 22.3%. We have Albies and Freeman above 30%. So, I mean, I like Atlanta. If I, maybe can build some like Atlanta plus Noah plus Bazz stacks, something like that, makes some sense to lower the total ownership. But just with how popular the entire lineup is, it's going to be difficult to get to them in large field tournaments, I think.
Yeah, and like you said, every single play here is popular. Here's where they come into play. That's where the Shane Bazz play makes sense. If you really like the Atlanta Braves, play Bazz in those lineups because he's projected for 1% ownership. In that sort of situation, you already have a pretty unique lineup, and the Braves offense, they have the best chance of being the top stack on the slate still. So I want to get exposure to them. I'm going to be underweight to the field. I'm not going to be playing at the nearly 30% the field does. But if I end up with them around 10%, I'm going to be inclined to get Bazz in that lineup. If you're playing a Brave stack with Ranger Suarez and Robbie Ray or Ranger Suarez and Freddie Peralta, that is a massively chalky lineup that's going to be very difficult to win with today. So the Atlanta Braves, clearly on paper, it's a good spot for them, but I'm just going to have to look a little bit elsewhere to try to differentiate the ownership and ultimately come underweight to the field. But do you anticipate that you are going to be close to the field in terms of the amount you stack them?
I would expect that I end up under the field just because there are other teams to get to. We have Houston, you have the Yankees that are projected to go over owned, but not by quite as much. And then there are some other, lower owned stacks I like because, like Oakland's not getting a lot of ownership. Toronto, certainly a high upside spot for them against a pitcher making his major league debut, no matter how good he is. But then also even teams like Tampa Bay and Baltimore facing very, very popular pitchers. So there's a lot of stacks that I like for one reason or another. And that just makes me think that it's unlikely to be a situation where I just like jam over the field on the Braves.
Yeah, and there's a spot that I think really makes for a good pivot. And Adam, you already know what it's going to be. You know where we're going here, right? We have to talk about the Houston Astros yet again because the Houston Astros, the Houston Astros relative to the Atlanta Braves, fairly similar chance to be a top stack. 16.6% chance for the Houston Astros, 18.8% for the Atlanta Braves. However, the Braves projected now for about 28% ownership compared to 17% ownership for the Houston Astros. I'm going to take the ownership discount and listen, fool me once. And then it was George Bush said, fool me once, but fool me twice. I won't get fooled again. The Houston Astros, fool me 50 times because it is it's probably going to happen again here. Except relative to the projections, the ownership here, I think the Astros are the most sensible pivot on the high end off the Braves.
Yeah, agreed. And we just got their lineup. No Jose Altuve makes the lineup a little bit weaker. Kyle Tucker is in, but you also get a clear top value option now with Jose Siri batting leadoff at 2K flat on DraftKings. Jaime Bria, just another pitcher that isn't particularly good. This year, he's He's allowed a 151 expected ISO, 349 expected WOBA to righties, 163 expected ISO, 361 expected WOBA to lefties. Those numbers aren't horrible, but only a 16.5% strikeout percentage against righties, 9.1% against lefties. If you go back to the start of the 2019 season, major power issues to righties, 237 expected ISO. We know Houston has tons of power in this lineup. They also offer value, not only Siri leading off, but minimum salary Marwin Gonzalez batting 7th, minimum salary Chas McCormick batting 8th, near minimum salary Maldonado batting 9th. So it's a team that you can, offset. You can use for value in addition to having some of the best hitter options in Bregman, Alvarez, and Tucker.
Yeah, and I wonder now, Siri's going to be super popular, isn't he? He's going to end up being one of the most popular hitters on the slate now.
I would think so. The only thing that could hold it in check is that he's an outfielder, and there's always a million options there. But yeah, he'll be popular.
Yeah, we don't have an updated ownership yet. If we do, I'll bring up that the Siri ownership once we get a number. And guess what? We've got our guy Adam Sean V. We go a little head to head with him. He says that Jaime Barria has been good at home this year. Is it time to do a little deep dive here? Barria.
It's not even worth looking at. It's a pretty good park to pitch in. I don't think he's likely to be drastically better at home, in general. And then also he has made a total of, he's thrown a total of 25 innings at home. You should not be drawing any sort of conclusion from that.
Let's look at his career splits. Let's see for his career. Because
he has always been better at home, but he's still only thrown 144 innings total. Yeah.
25 innings is not going to show us very much data. And by the way, his underlying numbers at home that still suck for his career. He's a 4.42 FIP, a 4.79 xFIP at home for his career. He strikes out 18.9% of hitters for his career in Los Angeles. So does he pitch better at home than he does on the road? Yes, but that's also because on the road for his career is a 5.61 FIP compared to a 4.42 FIP. Still a pitcher who, by and large part, when he's pitching home, has not been good. And I wouldn't read too much into 25 innings that he's thrown at home in one individual season.
Yeah, and either way, the other thing you have to keep in mind, everything's relative. Okay, so let's say he's better at home. He's still facing the Astros, and better in the case of Jaime Barria is less bad. It's not good.
Yeah, and let's see, who has he faced? I'm kind of curious now just to see who he's faced at home this year. He has faced by the way, he has made one home start against the Houston Astros. He pitched 3 innings, gave up 3 runs in that start. His other home starts, the Yankees, he didn't pitch well in that start. The Rangers, he pitched well against the Rangers at home. He pitched well against Oakland at home, and then he pitched 4 innings against Cleveland. There's just nothing here to really draw any conclusion from. It's 25 innings. It's very, very limited sample size. So Sean seems to feel differently, which is all well and good, except I'm going to be stacking Houston Astros today. And I mean, it's not like I'm getting to them in 40% of my lineups or anything, but I just like them relative to ownership a little bit more than the Braves. But a team on the low end that I really do like for contrarian purposes, the Toronto Blue Jays, who we kind of both sides of this game are going totally overlooked, whereas people aren't rostering Shane Bazz at all today because it's a tough matchup against the Toronto Blue Jays. But it's odd to me that nobody's rostering Toronto when considering that they don't want to roster Bazz either. So he's a rookie pitcher making his first start, and that's a pretty volatile type thing. We don't know what he's going to look like in the big leagues. He could be really good. He might be kind of shit. We don't know. We're not going to know until after the game's over. And it's going to seem pretty obvious after the fact. But the fact that Bazz is picking up 1% projected ownership, the Toronto Blue Jays are picking up 3.3% projected ownership. There's a lot more upside in this spot than the numbers are showing from ownership.
Yeah, and if you want an example of a very talented, highly regarded pitching prospect who has struggled immediately in the majors, you can look on the same team and just look at Luis Patino. It's a jump. There's no guarantee these guys have success right out of the gate. And this is just one of those situations where it seems like we've had it with we get it with Toronto a good amount. We get it with the Red Sox a ton, where it's just they're facing a good pitcher, so I don't want to roster the offense, but I also don't want to roster the pitcher when one side typically is going to win out there. You're going to get your share of 4-3 games where neither side is really that useful, but there's plenty of potential for Toronto to just blow up a guy in his first major league start. The bullpen's good behind him. The park is tough to hit in, but you're getting low ownership. All of these, this would matter a lot more if Toronto were one of the most popular offenses tonight. You're talking about an offense that against right-handed pitching this year, their active roster has a 115 WRC plus, a 199 ISO, and has only struck out 20.3% of the time. It's very obvious that this team can go out there and just throw a million runs on the board against pretty much anybody. And then Shane Bazz on the other side, yeah, he's not super likely to have a ceiling start against Toronto, but you're talking about someone that has a 36% strikeout percentage at AAA, is one of the best pitching prospects in baseball. In a one-game sample against any team, he can certainly go out there and just pile up strikeouts. So I think that this is a situation where the median projections on both sides are just going to not quite tell the full story in terms of what it looks like when one of these sides does well. Like when Bazz does well, it typically is going to involve a lot of strikeouts. We know Toronto has tons of power in their lineup. So when they do well, a lot of times it's going to mean multiple home runs. So I just think median projections here aren't telling the full story, and it's leading to low ownership on both sides.
Yeah, that's where I'm at as well. There's upside on both spots, and just we don't have the field going to either spot. So I wouldn't be shocked at all to see either side of this end up in an optimal lineup today. And the field is just kind of writing it off entirely, writing off both sides. So Toronto Blue Jays, a team that I'm going to be looking to get to. And also, we talked about Ranger Suarez as a pitcher before. He's really popular. I don't mind playing him with the Toronto Blue Jays, for instance, though, because Toronto is just not picking up the ownership. So that's probably where I'm going to be looking to go. But is that also kind of, we talked about Ranger Suarez before, is he a pitcher you'd be more comfortable fitting in with the Blue Jays?
Yeah, because, I think Toronto's ownership is likely to be low enough that I'm not going to be too concerned about the pitching ownership. I mean, right now on DraftKings, the highest projected hitter on Toronto is George Springer at 5%. So I'm not going to be too worried about what I do at pitcher. I'm typically going to just want to get the best options around Toronto in terms of, secondary stack or one-offs and pitchers.
All right. Looking at some of these other stacks now, and in terms of overall leverage here, the number one leverage stack on the slate is the Toronto Blue Jays. What are you going to do with some of these other lower owned teams that are picking up positive leverage scores, but are also really, really low owned and also don't have good chance of being a top stack? So it seemed like the Seattle Mariners, 1% ownership, 4% chance to be a top stack. The St. Louis Cardinals against Freddie Peralta, tough spot. Peralta is going to be chalk. 1% ownership for them as well, 3.8% chance to be a top stack. Same goes for the Texas Rangers. Really low probability stacks that are also not picking up much ownership. So are these teams you're going to be looking to work into your lineups at a decent clip?
Yeah, I think one thing that helps most of them is that they're facing popular pitchers. So the Angels are going to be a little bit tougher, I think, because Valdez isn't getting much ownership. Right now, we have the Diamondbacks going actually over-owned, but like Baltimore going up against Suarez, Baltimore's lineup tonight is not very good, but you're talking about a pitcher that's getting, 40+% ownership in a park that's favorable for hitters. Austin Hayes, Mountcastle, Santander, Severino, those guys are all solid. And then you just, mix in one of the other guys and there's your fifth. So you're getting negative correlation with the field, which is always something that's important to me if I'm going to a really low probability stack. When they do have success, I want to be eliminating as much of the field as I can. It's just, makes it a little bit easier to win with them as opposed to going to a low probability stack where you're not negatively correlated with the field and you really need them to just outscore every other team. That's a little bit more difficult to ask. But we know the Orioles do have some power in their lineup. The Rangers, I think, are actually a little bit more difficult sell for me than the Orioles, but same thing, in terms of the logic, at least they're low owned and they negatively correlate with Cortez, even though he's getting a bit less ownership than Suarez. We mentioned Tampa Bay. That's a very good offense that has a very, very difficult matchup. Like, it would be more surprising if Robbie Ray has a bad game, I think, than if Ranger Suarez does, but Tampa Bay also is a hell of a lot better than the Orioles. So as far as the lower owned, like negative correlation stacks, I think Tampa Bay and Baltimore are the ones that stand out to me the most.
Yeah, I think that is totally sensible. And then the other thing also, Robbie Ray is going to be really popular today, and he has right now. Do you know what Robbie Ray's left on base percentage is?
Like 86% or something.
Oh, it is way higher than that.
Oh my God.
He is. All right. So it was, I remember looking at it the other day and it was right around, so it is 90.3. It is the highest in the history of baseball by a pretty good clip. If we take out last year, because last year was a really wonky season where there was, 60 games, it was a really small sample size. I think the best ever left on base percentage was somewhere in the neighborhood of 86 or 87%. And Robbie Ray over 90%. That is nearly impossible to do. That's not to say Robbie Ray's been bad this year, because clearly that's not the case. He's right now the betting favorite to win American League Cy Young. I think he shouldn't win the award, except it seems like there's a pretty good chance that could happen after Garrett Cole got his face kicked in yesterday. But Robbie Ray's he's just benefited from so much luck this year. And we've seen the Tampa Bay Rays this year. These are kind of the spots where they've come through a lot, where they've gone up against chalky pitchers. They've been in tough matchups. we've seen Tampa Bay have all kinds of success against pitchers when they were popular, whether it was, Chris Sale a couple of weeks ago. We saw him do it against Eduardo Rodriguez. So the Tampa Bay Rays are never a team that I think should be slept on. Are there any individual hitters that stand out to you in the lineup?
So one other thing about left on base percentage, there is another starter on this slate, fewer starts, but Nestor Cortez, 90% left on base percentage as a starter this year as well. So kind of going back to the conversation about him for a second, I don't think he's as good overall as he has been. But the strikeout stuff is just, has been there. But individually for Tampa Bay, I think, right-handed power is really where you're going to want to look, and they have plenty of it. The entire lineup, with the exception of Joey Wendell and Kevin Kiermaier, is right-handed. I think Manny Margot hitting cleanup at 3,100 looks pretty good. Arosa Rainey at 4,300, probably my favorite option though.
Yeah, that's all. By the way, we have the lineup in here. Also, pretty cheap lineup, other than Nelson Cruz at 6,100. Other than that, we've got Arosa Rainey 4,300. Everybody else in lineup 3,900 and below. So given the quality of the Rays offense, I don't think this is a bad spot at all, relative to price and ownership. One thing though, is pinch hitting at all a concern for you? Like Jordan Luplow is batting fifth. He's 3,000. And then some other guys more towards the bottom line, maybe less of a concern, but Luplow individually, somebody's making it into a decent amount of my lineups as a one-off just for the leverage and me trying to get overweight to the Rays. But do you think I should be concerned about a pinch hitting situation here? Sort
of, but it's always hard for me, from an action standpoint, because on the other hand, Luplow is hitting fifth. He's 3K flat. He doesn't have to do a whole lot, to have success. And I think if you're stacking Tampa Bay, he's likely to be a pretty useful piece there. But I do think it's likely he gets pinch hit for at some point in the game. You don't have Austin Meadows starting. You don't have Brandon Lau starting. The bottom of the order, I think, should actually be pretty safe though. Kiermaier, is starting in a lefty-lefty matchup. He's in there for defensive reasons. Taylor Walls, I assume they're not going to pinch hit for, although I guess you could have Brandon Lau, but I don't think they're going to. I don't think that's too likely. And then Mejia, they're probably not going to pinch hit for their catcher. Wendell starting in a lefty-lefty matchup. So I think the biggest pinch hit risks are probably Luplow and Margot.
Yeah, and Margot
yes, to some extent too, I guess.
Yeah. The one with Luplow also is just that, we've seen that in a lot of games this year. He's had starts where he's only ended up with, 2 plate appearances. So it's on my mind, but still is a one-off against Robbie Ray. Still somebody I think makes sense. And the price tag is right. Yep. Now, one other really popular stack that we really have to talk about here is the New York Yankees, who right now on DraftKings are the second or the number one most negatively leveraged team. Let me refresh to see if that is still the case. Number one actually at a bigger clip now. We have the Yankees 21.1% projected ownership, 11% chance to be a top stack. So the Yankees picking up a negative 10.1 leverage score, making them overall the most over-owned team on DK, over on Fanduel, with the Yankees also going over-owned, but not quite to the same extent, with a 15.3% ownership share. So the Yankees, obviously, it's an upside spot for them basically whenever they're up against any kind of pitcher because of all the power that's in the offense. But with that said, it's too much ownership for me. I'm just going to be crossing my fingers and hope that any other team on the slate ends up being the highest scoring team and not the Yankees. Even the Braves, as negatively leveraged as they are, I'm more inclined to get to them just because there's a gap in top stack odds between the Yankees and the Braves. We have the Braves with an 18% chance to be a top stack compared to that 11% for the Yankees. So how are you going to be handling New York?
I think I'm probably getting to the Yankees more than I get to the Braves because they're really cheap as well, and getting, at least a little bit less ownership. But like Joey Gallo at 20%, Torres at 18, $4,300 Stanton at 16. That's not too concerning to me. Whereas, the Braves are just kind of across the board getting more. But the value is what really stands out too. Like you have LeMahieu at 3,800, you have Rizzo at 3,800. The only hitter on the Yankees that is over 5K is Aaron Judge. Similarly on the Braves, the only hitter over 5K is Freddie Freeman. But I think as a whole, that lineup's just pulling a little bit more ownership. So with both, I'm going to just want to make sure that I'm using cheap, secondary stacked or primary stacks, or not cheap, low owned, and same for pitching. Like if I'm stacking Toronto, for example, I don't really care about getting to the Yankees or the Braves to round that out. But where I'm going to, Houston and Suarez or something, I'm probably not using the Yankees or the Braves to fill it out.
That's Yankees. It's too popular for me. I'm going to be making a couple of stacks of them, but I'm going to be very, very heavily underweight to the Yankees. Obviously, to the Yankees, there's upside, except it's a team that relative to field ownership, this is my least favorite stack on the entire slate today. By the way, this is unrelated to really anything except for I'm going to be talking about this team as a stack next. But Orton's Neckbeard said, why don't people bunt on John Lester's hillbilly ass? I think that's a good point. Why do people not bunt on John Lester more? We've seen him. He can't throw the ball to first base. He had that weird thing where he just didn't try to pick people off at all because whatever was the yips or whatever it was, that does seem like people just try to bunt on John Lester more, make him field the ball and throw to first base. But that aside, what do you make of the Milwaukee Brewers as an offense today who were not expected to be facing John Lester early in the day, but then a pitching change. It was supposed to be John Woodford. Now it's going to be Lester. What do you make of the pitching change?
So, I mean, he got over the first base thing, right? Like he's been pretty average at preventing steals for a while now. But as far as Milwaukee goes, they are projected to be pretty drastically overowned on DraftKings. 15.8% chance of, or 15.8% aggregate ownership, 7.2% chance of being the top stack. So definitely another one of these teams where I think it's a pretty good spot. But there, did I not? So it's a pretty good spot. The only guys actually getting ownership though are Adames and Garcia. Everyone else is less than 10%. So I think I might have forgotten to refresh the top stack tool. But I think that they're both good plays. Like Adames is really cheap. He's sitting second. He's 3,900. Garcia, we know, has a lot of power. The rest of this team not getting much ownership. So I do actually like full stacks from Milwaukee because Lester probably not quite as bad as some of the other pitching on this slate, but certainly not good. Doesn't miss a lot of bats. Milwaukee does have power in their lineup. So I actually don't mind Milwaukee when you look at the individual ownership.
I think the easiest way to make contrarian stacks, just take Willie Adames out. Adames is so much more popular than every other team in this lineup, is really what's driving the ownership. First off, his price tag is wrong. He's 3,900 on DraftKings. That's just a misprice here with him coming off the injured list. And obviously, El Garcia also somewhat popular, but not near Adames. So I think that's the way to go here. Is make high upside stacks, take Adames out. How inclined would you be to make Milwaukee stacks that just roster any 5 hitters other than Adames?
Yeah, exactly. That's one easy way to do it. And you can certainly include Adames too, though, because he is one of the best shortstop options. It's just, it's going to pull the ownership of your lineup up a little bit. Like if you don't use Adames, then you're contrarian even compared to Milwaukee stacks. But, if you use him, it's still one spot. It's still a really good play. So definitely, I don't think you were saying it either, like, just to not use Adames, but it's certainly one route you can go.
Yeah, I'm going to make, I'm not saying I'm going to do it in all my Brewer stacks, but in some of my Brewer stacks. Yeah. I won't play Adames. And that's something that I assume that based on Adames' ownership, he's going to be included in almost all of the field's Brewer stacks. He's a great play. He's going to pop up in optimizers a ton. So that's one way I'm going to differentiate my Brewer stacks. We only have a couple minutes left before we hand it over to the NFL crew. Any other offenses that you want to bring up here that you think are a priority?
I was laughing because someone asked how we got me smiling in an emoji if it was Photoshop.
That was very funny.
Yeah, as far as the other offenses go, I think we've pretty much hit on the ones I like. Talked about Baltimore, talked about Tampa for negative correlation. I guess Oakland, I'd sort of mentioned, but they're one that I understand why they're not getting much ownership. They're not in a favorable park for hitting. They're facing an okay pitcher in Tyler Anderson, but this is a team that I just always like stacking when they're low owned because they have so much power. Anderson has allowed a 180 expected ISO to righties this year, sub 100 to lefties, but the only lefty in the lineup is Matt Olson, who just hits the hell out of everyone. You have Harrison, Marte, Chapman, Gomes, Kana. These guys all give you significant power upside. There's some pinch hit risk with Chris Davis and Chad Pinder, but 1 through 6 at the very least, I think are very strong plays. And then, Pinder and Davis are cheap. So I do like Oakland, even though they certainly don't stand out as far as being in a good park or facing a bad pitcher.
All right, that is going to do it for us today. On the way out, I'm going to leave you a little bit of good news here. We've got a very highly rated MLB player prop bet in our MLB Player Props, which is free to use over at Awesemo.com. Robbie Ray, under 8.5 strikeouts. We have that hitting 68% of the time. That is a 31% expected ROI. Guys, good luck tonight, and do not go anywhere. NFL Deeper Dive at NFL Live Before Lock for Showdown. That's coming up next.